In a quiet town surrounded by beautiful countryside, there stood a small church at the center of the community. The town was peaceful and close-knit, with cobblestone streets and old buildings that everyone knew. It was the kind of place where families attended Sunday Mass together, and neighbors greeted each other with friendly smiles. Church, with its tall stone walls and colorful stained glass windows, was the heart of the town, and its bell rang every hour, reminding everyone of its importance. Father Thomas, the town's Catholic priest, was well loved by all. At 45 years old, he had been serving the church for nearly 20 years. People admired him for his deep faith and kind nature. Every Sunday, his sermons filled the church with warmth and inspiration. He spoke with such passion that the congregation listened intently, hanging on every word. Many parishioners turned to Father Thomas for guidance, knowing he would offer thoughtful and caring advice on everything from troubled marriages to personal struggles. Father Thomas didn't just work within the church. He was deeply involved in the town's activities. He organized charity events, food drives, and social gatherings for the community. Whether it was raising money for the local orphanage or organizing a holiday event for the elderly, Father Thomas was always there, lending a hand. To the people in town, he wasn't just a priest, he was a trusted friend and a constant support. However, behind this image of the perfect, devoted priest, Father Thomas carried a deep personal struggle. Despite his strong faith and dedication to his vows of celibacy, he had feelings he couldn't ignore. Over the years, these desires became harder to control, and he found himself torn between his religious duties and his personal emotions. This inner conflict was something he kept hidden from everyone, even though it weighed heavily on him. Father Thomas was a man of respect in the town, but on the inside, he was lonely and struggling with feelings he could never act on. His role as a priest meant he had to suppress these desires, but they were still there, lingering in the background of his life. He knew he could never fully connect with someone in the way he longed for, and this created a deep sense of isolation. As time passed, the struggle inside Father Thomas grew stronger, setting him on a path he never imagined. The perfect life he had built in the eyes of the community was about to crumble, and no one could foresee the events that would follow. Maria was a woman in her early 30s who had recently moved to the town, looking for a fresh start. She had a troubled past that still haunted her, a past filled with grief, loss, and broken relationships. Her husband had died unexpectedly a few years ago, leaving her to raise their young daughter alone. The pain of his sudden death had left a mark on Maria's heart, and she carried that weight with her wherever she went. Despite her best efforts to put on a brave face, Maria often found herself overwhelmed by feelings of loneliness and sadness. When she first walked into the church, she didn't expect to find much more than a place to pray and perhaps a sense of calm. But she was drawn to Father Thomas's presence. His kind eyes and calming voice seemed to soothe her troubled soul, and soon she found herself seeking him out for counseling. At first, it was about her grief, how to cope with the loss of her husband, and the challenges of being a single mother. Father Thomas listened patiently, offering spiritual comfort and guidance. Over time, Maria's visits to Father Thomas became more frequent. She began confiding in him, not just about her late husband, but about other personal struggles, including the difficulties she faced adjusting to life in a small town. Father Thomas, in turn, became deeply invested in her well-being. He offered her advice, encouragement, and support, making her feel heard and valued in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. What started as a professional relationship began to shift into something more. Their emotional connection deepened, and Maria found herself increasingly drawn to him, not just for his wisdom, but for his compassion and understanding. In her vulnerability, She began to feel something more than just gratitude for Father Thomas. She began to develop feelings for him. She was starved for affection, and the comfort he provided stirred emotions she had long buried. Father Thomas, despite his vows and his commitment to celibacy, began to feel the same pull toward her. He found himself looking forward to their private conversations, feeling a sense of connection he had not experienced in years. As their bond grew stronger, the line between priest and parishioner began to blur. What had started as innocent counseling slowly transformed into something more intimate. Their conversations became more personal, and the space between them, once professional, became filled with a quiet tension. In moments of vulnerability, their eyes would linger on each other just a little too long, and their voices would soften in ways that hinted at unspoken desires. Neither of them acknowledged it outright, but the attraction was undeniable. Soon, their meetings took on a more secretive tone. Father Thomas found himself justifying the growing connection by convincing himself that it wasn't wrong he wasn't breaking his vows in any physical sense. He would tell himself that these moments with Maria, these deep emotional exchanges, were simply a way for him to escape the pressure and loneliness he felt. The church, with its expectations and strictures, had become a place of isolation for him, and Maria provided him with a comfort he could not find elsewhere. The two began meeting in more secluded places, quiet corners of the church, the basement where old furniture was stored, or the small garden behind the church where no one could see them. These secret meetings allowed them to share their thoughts and feelings without fear of judgment or interruption. It was in these private moments that their emotional bond grew even more intense, eventually blossoming into a full-blown romantic affair. Father Thomas, still struggling with guilt, tried to justify the affair in his mind, convincing himself that it was only an emotional connection, that it wasn't the same as breaking his vow of celibacy. But deep down, he knew he was crossing a line. He knew that what was happening between them could not be easily undone. But in the midst of his internal conflict, he could not seem to stop himself. Maria, too, was torn. She had come to rely on Father Thomas, not only as a priest, but as someone who seemed to understand her pain in a way no one else could. She felt seen, heard, and desired in a way she hadn't felt since the loss of her husband. What had started as a simple act of seeking comfort had turned into something much more complicated. The affair remained hidden, known only to a few of Maria's close friends, who were aware of the growing bond between the two. They were cautious, speaking in hushed tones when the subject came up, aware of the consequences if anyone else were to find out. Father Thomas was well respected in the community, and the scandal of an affair would destroy everything he had built. For now, they kept their secret, telling themselves that no one would suspect a thing. But with each passing day, the affair became more dangerous, its risks growing as their connection deepened. Despite the secrecy, there was a thrill in their hidden meetings, a sense of forbidden excitement that neither of them could shake. What began as a quiet escape from the pressures of their lives had now turned into something far more consuming, and neither could predict how their affair would eventually spiral out of control. As Father Thomas and Maria's affair went on, the guilt started to weigh heavily on Father Thomas. He had always been dedicated to his faith and his role as a priest, but now the affair made him feel conflicted. He couldn't stop thinking about the vows he had taken and the guilt that came with breaking them. His emotional turmoil began to show. He grew distant from the people in the church and started withdrawing from the community. Once, he had been active and involved in church events, but now he was often distracted and cold. His sermons became less passionate, and he didn't seem to care about the people who once relied on him for guidance. Maria, on the other hand, was growing more impatient. At first, She had been okay with keeping their relationship secret, but now she wanted more. She didn't want to hide their love any longer. She wanted Father Thomas to be with her openly, not in secret meetings. She started pushing him to leave the church and start a life with her. She felt trapped, living in a lie, while Father Thomas seemed more focused on protecting his image as a priest than being with her. Father Thomas was torn. He loved Maria, but felt the heavy burden of his vows. He couldn't bring himself to leave the church and give up his life as a priest, even though he felt strongly for her. He kept telling her that he couldn't do it, that his vows were too important. But Maria didn't understand. She thought that if he truly loved her, he would choose her over everything else. This disagreement caused a lot of arguments between them. Maria would accuse him of being selfish and putting the church before their love. She demanded that he make a choice, leave the church and be with her, or end the affair. But Father Thomas couldn't bring himself to make that choice. The guilt he felt about his vows kept him stuck. Each argument left them both frustrated and upset, and their bond started to crack. Maria felt like she was giving everything for this secret relationship, but Father Thomas seemed unwilling to do the same. She was tired of being in the shadows and wanted to live her life with him. But Father Thomas couldn't let go of his role as a priest, and that left Maria feeling even more trapped. The tension between them grew with each passing day, and their once strong connection began to fray under the weight of their emotional struggles. One day, the secret affair between Father Thomas and Maria was exposed, but not in the way either of them had expected. Parishioner, who was an old friend of Maria's, unknowingly stumbled upon their secret. Parishioner had come to the church looking for counseling, as many did with Father Thomas, but found Maria leaving the priest's private office in an unexpected and compromising situation. The parishioner immediately grew suspicious. They knew Maria well enough to recognize something was off. Though Maria had been careful to avoid drawing attention, the accidental encounter sparked doubt in the parishioner's mind. Realizing what they had just witnessed, they became determined to confront the situation. The parishioner, feeling betrayed by both Maria and Father Thomas, threatened to expose the affair to the entire congregation. Father Thomas was blindsided by the discovery. Panic quickly set in as he realized that his double life was on the verge of being revealed. He tried to reason with the parishioner, begging them to keep the secret, promising that it would all be sorted out without the church or the community ever finding out. But the parishioner was unmoved. They were angry and hurt, knowing that the priest, a trusted figure in the community, had been hiding such a dark secret. With the threat of exposure hanging over him, Father Thomas's mind raced. He understood that if the affair came to light, it would ruin everything. His position as priest, his reputation in the town, and the trust of his parishioners would all be lost. The idea of facing the church's wrath and the shame of betraying his vows terrified him. His whole life, built on a foundation of faith and respect, was about to crumble. As the news began to spread, Maria also felt the heavy weight of the impending exposure. The fear of being caught made her spiral emotionally. She became increasingly paranoid and desperate, knowing the truth could destroy everything. Every moment of their relationship felt like it could be their last. She was terrified of what would happen if the affair was revealed. Father Thomas's career, her reputation, and the fragile life she had tried to rebuild would all be in jeopardy. Maria's anxiety grew with each passing day. She became possessive, her desperation taking a toll on their relationship. She would constantly check in with Father Thomas, worrying about every little detail. She warned him repeatedly about the consequences they would both face if they were discovered. Her once calm demeanor now turned frantic, and she began to lash out in frustration at Father Thomas, accusing him of not doing enough to protect their secret. She didn't want to face the inevitable fallout, and the constant fear of exposure made her irrational and clingy. Father Thomas, already under enormous pressure from his guilt and the threat of exposure, now had to deal with Maria's increasing instability. He tried to reassure her, but his words felt hollow even to himself. He couldn't deny that the situation was rapidly spiraling out of control. The affair, which had once seemed like an escape from his struggles, was now the cause of his undoing. He could see the end of everything he had worked for approaching, and the emotional strain of the impending discovery was overwhelming. As the tension built, both Father Thomas and Maria were on the brink of a breakdown, unable to stop what seemed like the inevitable revelation of their secret to the entire community. As the days passed, Maria felt more and more trapped. The affair was about to be exposed, and Father Thomas seemed unable or unwilling to make any decisions about their future. Maria's feelings of betrayal grew stronger. She had given him her trust and love, but he couldn't bring himself to choose her over his priestly vows and the church. This left her feeling alone and abandoned. One evening, after Mass, Maria couldn't hold back her anger any longer. She waited for Father Thomas in his office, her heart racing with frustration. When he arrived, she confronted him. She demanded answers, accusing him of breaking his promises and leaving her in a life of secrecy. Father Thomas tried to explain, speaking about his vows and the consequences of their affair being exposed. He spoke about how much he valued his life as a priest, but to Maria, his words felt like excuses. In that moment, her anger and hurt took over. She felt completely betrayed, and in a fit of rage, Maria grabbed a weapon, either a knife or a gun, and attacked. The violence of the moment was quick and brutal. Father Thomas fell to the ground, lifeless, his body showing signs of a struggle. Maria stood over him, shocked at what she had just done. In the confusion of the moment, she ran away, leaving the church behind. The town was left in a state of disbelief. People couldn't believe that the respected Father Thomas was dead. He had been found in his office, and signs of a struggle showed how intense the final moments had been. Whispers quickly spread through the community, and the mystery of his death grew deeper. Soon, it became clear that Father Thomas had been hiding a secret affair with Maria. The once trusted priest was now at the center of a shocking scandal, and Maria, driven by betrayal and desperation, had ended his life in a moment of blind fury. Quiet Town was forever changed by the tragic event. The police quickly began investigating Father Thomas's murder. They found signs of a struggle in his office, which suggested that the death was violent. As they gathered evidence, they discovered text messages and letters from Maria to Father Thomas. These showed the emotional tension between them. Some messages revealed Maria's frustration and demands for Father Thomas to choose her over his duties as a priest, while others showed her desperation and anger. The police also spoke to witnesses who had seen Maria near the church the night of the murder. One neighbor reported seeing her walking quickly toward the church, while another heard shouting coming from Father Thomas's office. This made it clear that an argument had taken place between Maria and Father Thomas before he was killed. With the evidence pointing to her, Maria quickly became the prime suspect. However, when the police tried to find her, they discovered that she had vanished. No one knew where she had gone, and she had seemingly disappeared without a trace. This made it harder for the authorities to solve the case. The police then started looking into Maria's past. They learned that she had a difficult history. She was a widow who had lost her husband in a mysterious way, and her life had been filled with sadness and instability. She had moved to the town, hoping for a fresh start, but became involved in a secret affair with Father Thomas. Her emotional struggles, combined with the affair, seemed to have pushed her to the breaking point. As the investigation continued, the police believed that Maria's anger and feelings of betrayal led her to murder Father Thomas. He had failed to make a choice about their future, and in her desperation, she killed him. But with Maria still missing, the police were left with many unanswered questions, and the town was left in shock, trying to understand how things had gone so wrong. After days of searching, the police finally find Maria. She is either found dead, having taken her own life due to guilt, or in a standoff with the police, or she is arrested. When Maria confesses, she reveals the painful emotions that led to her actions. She talks about how she was consumed by love for Father Thomas, but also overwhelmed by guilt and rejection when he refused to leave the church and be with her. In a moment of anger and heartbreak, she killed him. The town is in complete shock. Father Thomas had been a beloved figure, someone people trusted and admired. Now, they learn that he had been hiding a secret affair, and this revelation shakes everyone. Some people still feel sorry for Father Thomas, thinking he was trapped by his own struggles. Others feel betrayed by him, especially because his actions led to his death. At the same time, some people feel sympathy for Maria. They understand how she must have felt lost in love and pushed to the edge by rejection. Others, however, believe that she was just as responsible for the tragedy and that her actions were unforgivable. The town is torn. People can't agree on who to blame, and emotions run high. Some question the trust they had in Father Thomas, while others feel bad for Maria, believing she was a woman driven to a breaking point. The story ends with the community reflecting on how secret lives and hidden emotions can lead to serious consequences. Father Thomas and Maria both paid a heavy price for their choices. The tragedy serves as a reminder of how personal struggles, guilt, and unspoken pain can lead to actions that change lives forever.